The Russian Sleep Experiment, The Unspoken Truth. A classified account, recovered from the Soviet archives, 1947. They were promised freedom. What they found instead was an eternal scream. For 5 days, the subjects spoke. For 4, they whispered. Then, for 3 hours, one man did nothing but shriek until his throat ripped apart, leaving behind a silence far more terrifying than the noise. This is the classified account of the Soviet Union's most destructive psychological test, the Russian Sleep Experiment. Deep beneath the unforgiving expanse of Siberia, the air in the subterranean bunker was thick with the smell of ozone and disinfectant, a smell that did little to mask the fear gripping the hearts of the 4 Soviet researchers. Their mission was simple in its stated goal, but monstrous in its execution: to study the effects of prolonged wakefulness on the human mind using a newly developed, gaseous stimulant, codenamed Nitrogen-4. The subjects were 5 political prisoners, men deemed enemies of the state and promised their freedom if they survived the 30-day isolation. They were sealed inside a specially constructed testing chamber, equipped with soundproof glass panels, enough rations for over a month, and, most crucially, 4 high-sensitivity microphones connected to a massive spool of recording tape. The researchers, led by the stoic but increasingly nervous Dr. Anatoly Zarev, had a systemic, almost clinical detachment. They observed the men through the portholes, logging every detail. Act 1, The Illusion of Order, Days 1 to 5. The initial phase proceeded as expected. The Nitrogen-4 gas kept the 5 men intensely, unnaturally alert. They maintained lively conversations, reminiscing about their past lives, cracking bleak jokes, and occasionally attempting to communicate with the researchers via notes pressed against the glass, always asking the same question: how much time is left? The researchers noted that the stimulant had a side effect beyond mere wakefulness. It seemed to enhance the subject's metabolic rate, fueling their energy but also increasing their nervousness. On day 3, Subject 3, a former journalist, spent hours pacing, recounting historical facts in a frantic monologue. Subject 2, a former factory foreman, found the pacing irritating and snapped at him. The tension, though present, was normal for men confined together. But by the end of day 5, the first significant shift occurred. The conversations, once loud and full of energy, began to grow dark, evolving into hushed whispers. Dr. Zarev recorded in his log, the subjects are now communicating primarily through whispers. They occasionally attempt to talk over one another, but the tone is marked by a deep-seated paranoia, as if they fear the very air around them. The whispers continued for 3 days. The researchers adjusted the microphone sensitivity, but the content remained unintelligible, a continuous, low-level murmur, punctuated by strange, sibilant sounds. It sounded less like language and more like the constant rubbing of sandpaper. Act 2, The Sound of Silence, Days 9 to 14. The descent into pure horror began on day 9. At precisely 3:33 hours, Subject 4, a former student with no history of violence, began to scream. It was not a scream of terror, but a sound of pure, searing agony. It echoed off the titanium walls of the chamber, a raw, inhuman noise that drowned out the frantic attempts of the researchers to understand the situation. He screamed for 3 consecutive hours. He ran laps around the chamber, smashing his fists against the porthole glass until his knuckles bled. The researchers noted that the other 4 men did not react. They simply continued their whispering, occasionally glancing at the screaming men with what seemed like unnerving indifference. The screaming suddenly stopped. Subject 4 had ripped out his own vocal cords, tearing the fragile tissue from his throat until he could only gasp for air, blood pouring down his chest. He then collapsed onto the floor, silent but alive. The researchers were paralyzed. They argued fiercely over whether to enter the chamber, risking the integrity of the experiment, or to continue observing. Fear, coupled with the rigid demands of the Soviet state, won. They stayed outside. On day 12, a new horror emerged. The microphones went completely silent, not because the men stopped whispering, but because the sound pickups were deliberately sabotaged. The researchers realized that the men had somehow, using torn pieces of their literature, mixed with their own feces and saliva, applied a thick, adhesive plaster over the microphone inlets. All that remained was the muffled sound of labored breathing and the low, rhythmic thud of bodies moving inside the sealed metal box. Dr. Zarev, his hands trembling as he wrote, noted, "The subjects are displaying signs of extreme physical and psychological distress, coupled with an unknown, collective effort to prevent external monitoring. They are now completely cut off from the outside world, yet the air pressure sensor shows a continued, rapid consumption of oxygen, indicating high metabolic activity. Their survival is a statistical impossibility given the lack of sleep." The chamber's internal camera, a crude, slow-scanning device, offered glimpses of the interior, but nothing definitive. They could only confirm the number of bodies moving, 4. By day 14, the researchers made a final, desperate decision. The experiment had to end. The risk of the subjects dying and corrupting the final findings was too great. Climax, the forced entry, day 15. At dawn on the 15th day, a military squad, specially trained and heavily armed, was brought in. They positioned themselves outside the airlock. The researchers spoke into the intercom, their voices strained. "We are opening the chamber. We are leaving the stimulants. You will be free." A single, calm voice, the deep baritone of Subject 2, answered back, "We no longer want to be free. Do not open the chamber. Do not interfere." The airlock opened with a terrifying whoosh of escaping air. The stimulant gas was rapidly sucked out, replaced by fresh, normal air. And then, the terror became visible. The stench that rushed out of the chamber was overwhelming, a vile mix of blood, human waste, and something else, something metallic and rotten that defied classification. The interior was a slaughterhouse. Subject 4, the man who screamed, was dead, his throat torn open. But the other 4, they were in a state of unimaginable self-mutilation. Subject 1, a decorated war veteran, was missing large portions of the flesh on his thighs and chest. Subject 5 had deep, ragged wounds covering his abdomen. They had used their hands, their teeth, and shards of broken scientific glassware hidden in their pockets to perform crude, surgical-like removals of their own muscle and skin. Yet, despite the catastrophic injuries, they were not only alive, they were fighting. The subjects, powered by the bizarre stimulant and an unknown, monstrous drive, attacked the soldiers with maniacal strength. They moved with terrifying speed, ignoring the bullet wounds that instantly crippled the soldiers. One of the subjects tore the spleen from a soldier's body using only his bare hands. It was chaos. 2 of the remaining 4 subjects were killed by the soldiers in the ensuing melee, their unnaturally strong hearts finally giving out. Resolution: the whispering madness. Only 2 subjects remained, Subject 2 and Subject 3. They were heavily restrained and dragged into a separate, secure medical bay. Subject 3 was the first to be questioned by Dr. Zarev. He lay strapped to a table, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the ceiling. What were the whispers about? Dr. Zarev demanded, his own sanity frayed. Why did you sabotage the microphones? What made you do this to yourselves? The man's lips stretched into a horrifyingly wide, unnatural smile. His voice, now hoarse and rasping, was not his own. "We had to listen," he hissed, the sound like tearing cloth. "We had to." The silence was not enough. It was the voices. The deep voices that live inside you all. They spoke of freedom through flesh, of a higher existence beyond the chains of sleep. Subject 3 died moments later from sheer heart failure. Only Subject 2, the former foreman, remained. He was the strongest, and the most frighteningly calm. As the medical team prepared to administer anesthesia, he fought through his restraints, his eyes burning with a feverish, eternal wakefulness. Dr. Zarev leaned in, making his final entry into the log, asking the ultimate question. "Who are you? What have you become? Why did you insist on staying awake and causing such destruction? Subject 2 paused, the last survivor of the most terrible experiment in Soviet history. He looked directly into the doctor's eyes, and his voice was low, clear, and absolutely chilling. Have you forgotten so quickly? He rasped, a sickening grin splitting his face. We are merely the reflection. We are the dark passenger of the human spirit. We are the part of the mind that is desperate to never sleep again. I am the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be set free. And now, I am awake. He then snapped the restraints on his arm, lunged at the doctor, and had to be summarily executed by a guard. The final shot echoed through the sterile facility, ending the experiment, but not the terror. The researchers were immediately ordered to burn all data, all logs, and dismantle the facility. The final note in the official classified report simply read, "Experiment terminated. Reason, complete and irrevocable loss of control. Never to be repeated." But the stories, the whispers of the nitrogen-4 and the men who refused to sleep, were already beginning to leak out, spreading like a contagion across the silent, unforgiving corners of the world.